Some mornings feel too quiet, like the world is holding its breath. This was one of those mornings, calm, beautiful, but with a silence that almost felt wrong. Cynthia Diekema stepped out of her little white house in St. Lucie County, Florida. At 85, her movements were slow but full of purpose. She carried a small bowl of cat food in one hand and a folded napkin of breadcrumbs in the other. She always fed the stray cats by the canal. It was her little ritual, the thing that made her feel needed. Neighbors called her the cat lady, but they said it with kindness. She had a way of making even the most unwanted creatures feel seen. "Good morning, darlings," she whispered softly as she locked the door. The Florida marshlands stretched out beyond the row of houses. It looked peaceful, sunlight bouncing off still waters, dragonflies skimming the surface, but there was always an eerie edge to it. Because here, nature never really slept. Cynthia walked the familiar path she'd taken 100 times. Her white sneakers crunched gently over the gravel. In the distance, a heron stood motionless, waiting for a fish. Spanish moss swayed in the humid breeze. As she neared the canal, a thin orange cat trotted toward her, meowing loudly. "There you are, sweetheart," she said, crouching down to pour the food. "I know you're hungry." The cat purred, curling its thin tail around her leg. Cynthia smiled. For a brief moment, it was just another quiet Florida morning. But then something caught her eye. The water. It rippled. Not from wind, not from a fish. Just one slow, heavy ripple, right near the lilies. Cynthia paused. She straightened her back, peering at the surface. It was too bright to see clearly. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just a turtle. She murmured to herself. Must have been the breeze. She stayed still for another second, then shook her head and smiled. "Silly old woman," she said softly. "Don't go scaring yourself." From across the street, her neighbor Harold stepped out onto his porch, holding a mug of coffee. "Morning, Cynthia," he called. She waved back. "Morning, Harold. You feeding those strays again?" he asked. "Yes," she said, laughing lightly. "Someone has to." Cynthia tilted her head. "Oh, I haven't seen one in a while." "Yeah, just keep an eye out," Harold warned. "They like to hang around this time of year." But the truth was, she wasn't worried. She'd lived near Florida waters her whole life. Gators kept to themselves. She had never been afraid of them. She scattered a few breadcrumbs near the water's edge. "There you go, little ones," she whispered. "This one closer." The cat froze, ears twitching toward the canal. Cynthia glanced back but saw only still water. She knelt to pet the cat again, stroking its soft head. Behind her, just beneath the surface, a dark shape glided silently. She didn't see it. She couldn't feel the eyes watching her, and as she turned away, the silent predator drifted closer. This was the calm before the storm, the last morning that would ever feel ordinary. Some predators don't roar. They wait, silent, patient, hidden beneath the surface where no one thinks to look. Cynthia kept walking along the narrow canal path, humming faintly as the morning sun climbed higher. The orange stray followed behind her, weaving between her steps. The water beside her glimmered in the light, so calm it almost looked harmless. But under that thin skin of ripples, something moved. It was an alligator. Not just any alligator, Shadow. Locals had given it that name because it appeared without warning. 11 feet of prehistoric muscle and teeth, sliding silently through the canal. Most gators avoided humans, but Shadow was different. It was territorial, bold. People talked about it quietly over fences, but no one called wildlife officials. They thought it would move on. It didn't. Cynthia paused for a moment to admire a crane fishing near the reeds. She smiled at its grace, completely unaware of the shadow gliding closer to the bank. From behind, a familiar voice called out, "Morning, Cynthia." She turned to see Marie, her next-door neighbor, walking toward her with a small dog on a leash. "Morning, Marie," Cynthia replied warmly. "How's Daisy today?" "She's restless," Marie said, frowning slightly. "She doesn't like coming near the canal lately, keeps pulling away." Marie looked at the water with unease. "Or something bigger." Cynthia tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Cynthia glanced at the canal, but the surface was still, empty, harmless. "Oh, I've seen gators before," she said gently. "They don't bother anyone if you leave them alone." Cynthia smiled reassuringly. "I will. Don't worry." But behind that calm water, Shadow lurked. It didn't care about kindness. It didn't care about routines or warnings. It was a predator, and this was its territory. The orange stray cat hissed suddenly, its ears flattening. It darted toward a patch of grass, away from the canal. Cynthia frowned, confused. "What's gotten into you?" she asked softly. The water rippled again, subtle, too subtle for her to see. Marie tugged Daisy's leash nervously. "Cynthia, maybe you should head back soon just to be safe." Cynthia nodded. "I'll finish feeding the babies and head home." Marie gave a small wave, her dog pulling anxiously at the leash. "All right, be careful." As Marie disappeared down the path, Cynthia was alone again. Alone, except for the silent watcher. Shadows sank lower, only its nostrils above the water. It stayed perfectly still, waiting. There was no splash, no sound of movement, just the stillness that made the air feel heavier. But the path was empty. She sighed and smiled softly to herself. "You're imagining things," she whispered. It simply followed, knowing sooner or later she would make the wrong step. And when she did, it would be waiting. The canal stayed still, masking the danger that lived within it. Predators don't always rush. Sometimes they wait, watching, moving 1 inch at a time until the moment feels right. Beneath the calm surface of the canal, the alligator glided like a shadow. Only a faint ripple of its tail betrayed its movement. Its dark, unblinking eyes locked on Cynthia, studying her every step. She had no idea. She smiled gently and bent down to stroke it. It could smell the warmth of her skin, sense the soft vibrations of her movement. She stood and turned her back to the canal, brushing off her hands. Just as she did, a man with a fishing pole walked by. "Morning, Miss Cynthia," he greeted cheerfully. Cynthia smiled. "Morning, Peter. Any luck today?" "Thinking I'll head to the other side. Feels quiet here." "Probably too early," she said kindly. Peter glanced at the canal, frowning slightly. Water looks off today. Haven't seen a single fish jump." Peter squatted down, peering into the water. "You ever see that big gator they've been talking about? Folks say it's huge." "Yeah, maybe. Well, I'll see you later, Miss Cynthia. Be careful near that edge." "All right." She nodded. "Don't worry about me. I've lived here long enough to know the water." And just like that, she was alone again. Cynthia crouched to pick up the empty food container. The orange cat hissed suddenly, backing away. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked softly. The gator's massive head hovered just beneath the surface now, close enough that if she leaned forward, she might see the faint outline of its ridged back. But she didn't look. Instead, she stood slowly, dusting off her knees. Time to head home. The moment she turned her back again, shadow crept even closer, the water barely breaking around its snout. It was patient. It was calculating. The orange cat bolted suddenly into the brush, disappearing without a sound. Cynthia glanced over her shoulder. "Where are you going?" she called after it. The canal stayed silent. Cynthia walked a few steps down the path, not realizing the dark shape trailing her every move beneath the water. Almost beautiful. But the truth was, the peace was an illusion. But she didn't know. She didn't know that in the stillness of that water, something ancient was watching. This was no longer just a morning stroll. It was the beginning of a silent stalk, one that would end in horror. Cynthia had just taken a few slow steps down the path, her thoughts lost in the simple beauty of the morning. She paused to adjust her hat and glanced back toward the water. It was still, completely still. The massive alligator shifted silently, its muscles coiled like springs, its eyes locked on the soft, unsuspecting figure, just feet from the bank. Cynthia crouched for the last time, reaching for the empty food container she'd set down. She didn't see the faint ripple. She didn't notice the reeds parting. Then it struck. With a sudden explosion of water and force, shadow lunged from the canal. The sound was deafening, a violent splash that shattered the stillness. Before Cynthia could even scream, jaws like steel clamped down on her leg. She cried out, a high, sharp scream that echoed across the quiet marsh. "Help! Oh God, help me!" The gator's bite was pure power, its teeth sinking deep into her flesh. It thrashed once, yanking her off balance. Cynthia fell hard onto her side, her fingers scraping against the gravel. "No, please, no," she cried, tears streaming down her face. The predator didn't pause. With terrifying strength, it began the infamous death roll, twisting its massive body with incredible speed. The movement tore at Cynthia's leg, pulling her closer to the water's edge. From a nearby yard, a man heard the scream. Another neighbor, Marie, rushed outside, her little dog barking wildly. Cynthia, she screamed, her voice trembling. Marie ran toward the canal, but stopped in horror. There, just a few feet from the bank, she saw the massive gator, half in the water, half on land, dragging Cynthia down. "Help! Somebody help her!" Marie screamed. Cynthia's fingers dug desperately into the muddy ground. "Please, don't let it take me," she gasped, her voice raw with terror. But Shadow was relentless. It gave another violent twist, pulling her halfway into the canal. The water churned red as she struggled to grab onto the roots and reeds along the edge. For a brief moment, her eyes locked on Marie's. "Please," she whispered, barely able to speak. Marie stepped forward, but the sheer size of the animal froze her in place. She knew she couldn't fight it. "Oh my God," she sobbed. I can't stop it." Shadow dragged Cynthia fully into the water now, its tail thrashing with brute force. The sound of splashing was loud, frantic, terrifying. Cynthia's screams grew weaker. She gasped for breath, choking on the murky water as it swallowed her whole. Marie yelled to another neighbor who had run out. "Now! Call them now!" Beside it, but it was too late. The alligator rolled again, spinning with violent precision. Cynthia's body was no match for the raw, ancient strength of the predator. Within seconds, her head slipped beneath the surface. The water went still, silent. Marie stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. She kept calling her name. "Cynthia," she cried. "Cynthia, answer me." The only sign of the struggle was the faint ripple of the water settling back into place. Marie dropped to her knees, shaking. "Oh my God, she's gone," she whispered. Neighbors began gathering, their faces pale, their voices trembling. Someone held their phone to their ear, frantically giving directions to emergency services. A creature that had survived millions of years didn't know mercy. It only knew instinct. Beneath the water, Shadow held its prize. It didn't rush. It didn't flee. It simply stayed submerged, waiting out the chaos on the shore, knowing it had already won. Marie turned away, covering her mouth with shaking hands. The sound of distant sirens began to echo faintly, but they were too late. The last thing Cynthia felt was the crushing darkness of the water closing over her. The last sound she heard was the muffled splash of the gator's final roll. And then, silent. When the wildlife trappers and emergency teams arrived, all they saw was a still canal and a shaken group of neighbors pointing to the water. But this wasn't the end. The community demanded answers, and soon, the hunt for the killer gator would begin. The sirens came too late. By the time the flashing lights filled the quiet neighborhood, the water had already gone still again, hiding its terrible secret. Deputies stepped out of their vehicles, scanning the canal with heavy eyes. Wildlife officers followed, their boots crunching against the gravel. The neighbors stood in small, silent clusters, their faces pale, their voices trembling. Marie clutched her little dog to her chest, still shaking. "She was right there," she told an officer. "It dragged her in. I couldn't stop it." "You did the right thing by calling." Another deputy spoke quietly into his radio. "We've got one confirmed victim, likely a fatal alligator attack. We need trappers on site, immediately." Trappers scanned the murky water, their poles ready, their eyes searching for any sign of the massive reptile. Shadow was still there, waiting, watching. "We told people there was a big one out here," he muttered. "I knew it was trouble." Marie turned to him, her voice trembling with anger. "Then why didn't they remove it? Why was it still here?" Florida was full of canals like this, places where people and alligators lived side by side, and sometimes the lines blurred. Hours passed. Wildlife officers patrolled the banks, while divers searched below. But the canal was deep, dark, and wide. Cynthia was nowhere to be seen. Just after noon, a black SUV pulled up. A man and a woman stepped out. They were Cynthia's children. "Ma'am, we believe she was taken by a large alligator. We're still searching." The woman's voice cracked. "She was just out for her morning walk. She's lived here all her life." "How could this happen?" "I swear I did. It was too fast, too strong." Cynthia's son clenched his fists, his voice shaking with grief and anger. "Someone knew that thing was out here. Why didn't anyone stop this?" A massive dark shape, floating just beneath the waterline. 11 feet long, heavy, unmoving. "That's it," one of the trappers said quietly. "That's the gator. It already had what it wanted." Marie turned away, covering her mouth. She didn't want to see it. Cynthia's daughter stared at the creature in stunned silence. "That thing killed my mother," she whispered. But even as they loaded the giant predator onto a trailer, there was no satisfaction, just a hollow ache. Removing the gator wouldn't bring Cynthia back. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the reality sank in. This was the cost of living so close to wild water. Nature was beautiful, but it was also ruthless. She loved this place, she whispered to herself. She never thought it would take her life. The truth was brutal. Cynthia hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't provoked the animal. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the predator had been waiting. The next morning, the canal was quiet again, almost peaceful. But for the people who witnessed that day, it would never feel the same. Cynthia's family would soon plan her memorial. But for now, all they could do was grieve. And somewhere deep in the wild, beyond the fences and houses, more alligators still swam, waiting, surviving. Because in Florida, the line between human life and untamed nature is always thinner than it seemed. But even after the predator was gone, one question lingered in everyone's mind. How do you ever feel safe again? In the days after the attack, Cynthia's little yellow house felt empty. The porch where she'd sit with her tea, the small bowls she kept for the stray cats. It all sat quiet, untouched. She placed it gently on the step and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Cynthia. I wish I could have done more." Cynthia's daughter, holding back tears, spoke softly to the crowd that gathered at a small memorial by the canal. "My mother wasn't just a neighbor. She was kindness itself. She cared for things most people overlooked. She fed the cats no one wanted. She smiled at strangers. She didn't deserve this." Peter, the fisherman who'd spoken to her that morning, wiped his eyes. "She was here for years," he said quietly. "Always on this path. We should have warned her sooner. Maybe she'd still be here." The canal, now cordoned off with warning signs, looked peaceful again. Too peaceful. The water reflected the sky like nothing had ever happened. But everyone who lived nearby knew better. Shadow was gone now. Wildlife officers had taken the massive gator away. But even its absence didn't erase the fear. Marie stood by the water's edge, her voice trembling. "It's strange," she said. "That gator was here long before any of us. It didn't know Cynthia's life. It didn't know she was kind. To it she was just prey." Her words lingered in the heavy silence. The truth was, none of this was simple. Shadow wasn't evil. It was just an alligator, doing what alligators have done for millions of years. It wasn't personal. It was nature. But knowing that didn't make it easier to accept. Cynthia's daughter looked out at the still canal. She loved this place, she whispered. She felt safe here. How a place that feels peaceful can turn dangerous in a heartbeat. The stray orange cat appeared then, sitting quietly on the path where Cynthia used to kneel. It meowed once, softly, as if calling for the woman who would never return. "Don't worry, little one," she said. "I'll take care of you now." Life would move forward, but the ripple of loss would remain. For the family who lost a mother, for the neighbors who watched helplessly, for a community reminded that nature's beauty always hides sharp edges. And as the sun set over the marshland, the water glowed golden, hiding its secrets once more. Because in the end, it only takes one quiet moment for everything to change forever. We share this not to spread fear, but to honor her memory and remind everyone that even the calmest waters can hold hidden dangers. Nature is beautiful, but it is also untamed. If this story moved you, please take a moment to reflect on the balance between humans and wildlife. Stay aware, stay safe, and never forget how quickly a peaceful moment can change.